Hi, I'm Bruce Eckel,
And I'm James Ward.
and this is First Steps in Flex, and now we're going to look at effects. So I have to admit, in the last chapter when we started moving the button around, I was pretty entertained by that. Can we do more stuff like that?
Well, this is Flash, so we can do flashy things.
Okay, how do we do more effects like that?
Yeah, so let's dive into some code and check it out. So obviously, effects and animations are just applying uh, transitions and nice smooth effects to things on the screen, and so that's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. So we'll create a new project here called Effects.
So Flex actually has some sort of built-in structure so that you can attach these effects, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
and there's a number of different ways to apply them. So that's what we're going to look at is the different ways in which we can apply these effects.
So will this end up being something like, with HTML, the flash tag?
Hopefully, you're working with designers who can make design recommendations for your effects. And obviously, when programmers like me put effects into applications, it's probably not the best use of effects and animations.
So you make bad choices then.
Yes, yes. Okay. Developers can make bad choices with animations, but
they'll be fun anyway. So
they will be fun.
What the heck?
They are fun to do, for sure. There's actually, we point this out in the book, but there's a Flex interface guide available in the Adobe Developer Center, which has some great recommendations for when to use effects and how to use them correctly. So let's get started here. We have an application, and we're just going to add a button, and we'll give the button an ID, and set the label to click me, and set some properties for positioning. So horizontal center will be 0, and set the Y to 300, and then we're going to add a click event handler. So when we click the button, what we want to do is move it. If it's down at 300, we want to move it up to 50, and if it's at 50, then we want to move it down to 300. So let's add a click handler. What we're going to say is b.y equals 300. So we're doing a ternary expression here. So if b.y is 300, then set b.y equal to 50. Else set b.y equal to 300.
Now, before you do anything else,
yes.
What happens if you just run that code the way it is?
Let's give it a try. So let's run this code and see what happens. So there we have our button. We click it. We see it immediately shifts up. And if we click it again, shifts down, up, down.
So there's no real transition then going on.
Right. And so a great place for animations where we're trying to help the user maintain context is like a move effect. So let's say we want a nice move effect on this button as it moves. And so that's just one of the out of the box effects in Flex, is that whenever something moves on the screen, we can apply an effect to that move. So one of the ways to do that is to just set this effect handler called move effect, and then we can tell it what effect to use when that button moves, and we're just going to tell it to use the move effect. So move is just an out-of-the-box flex effect. There are other effects, fades, and all sorts of things. Not many other effects apply really logically to a move effect other than move, but you could probably come up with creative things if you wanted. Okay, so let's try this application now and see what happens. So now when we click the button, now we see a nice little move.
So we get some continuity.
That's right.
I can imagine if there was a lot of things on the screen and the button was just jumping from one place to another, it could look like it disappeared or something because you wouldn't know where it was going, but this gives you... So now, can you combine... Can I have more than one effect on that? Or a glow effect or something?
Yeah, there's tons of out-of-the-box effects that we could apply to this. Glows, anything. And we can run them in parallel. We can run them in sequences.
How would you run it in parallel?
So to run different effects in parallel, one of the things that we need to do is go beyond the simple syntax of specifying an effect. And what we're instead going to do is we're going to do a little bit longer notation here, where we're actually going to create an instance of the move effect. So we just do move there, and then we set some properties on move. So let's give it an ID. We'll call it move. And then let's set some properties like the duration. And we can set the duration to, say, 3,000 milliseconds. And now down in our button, what we're actually going to do is, rather than using just the default move effect, we're going to use binding and say, use the move effect that we defined up here.
So before we were able to just slip it in inline, but now that you want to do something more complex, you need to create an object.
Yeah, exactly. So that allows us to specify some more information or override some of the defaults here. And I need to rename this. Actually, I conflicted with a already existing method on application. There is a move method on, so let's call this long move instead. Okay, there we go. Now let's go try this again. Now we see it's going to take 3 seconds to move that button.
And I noticed that it's slower at the beginning and end and faster in the middle.
Yeah, so that's what we call easing. And there's a default easing function in Flex, and easing just defines the kind of curve or acceleration applied to an effect. And so you can override easing by setting the easing function here on the effect, and we can set it to a number of different things. We could set it to, the kind of fun one here is bounce. Bounce is an object. And we actually need to import that. So let's go add a script block here and import mx effects easing dot bounce. So there's that. And so we need to actually give it a specific function on this bounce object. So there's one there called ease out. And so what this is going to do is it's going to end the effect with a bounce, rather than if we did ease in, we could begin, or there's also an ease in out, which would do the bounce on both sides of the effect. So now if we run this one again, now we get a different easing function there, which is really just defining how over that 3 seconds that thing moves.
We are amused.
We are so amused. So that's just the easing functions. And back to your original question of, what if we wanted to do things in parallel? The way that we could do that is, let's get back to where we were before, is there's another effect class called parallel. There's also one called sequence. And so parallel is a way to apply multiple effects at the same time. So I can give this one let's call it PE.
So parallel really isn't an effect of its own, it's just a container for other effects.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the move in there, and then let's also put, I don't know, we'll try a glow. If that's going to work. We can just set that, and then let's set our move effect to PE. And now, hopefully it glows and moves. We'll see here. Is it glowing? It's not glowing. We might need to set some parameters on glow in order for that to work. So all these effects have different parameters we can specify. Let's see, what would be the
color,
right
maybe?
Here. Yeah, maybe color or blur. So anyways, you could play with that on your own, or in Tour de Flex there's some great samples of all of these effects. So you can get an idea in Tour de Flex for how to apply these different effects. So anyways, you can also do a sequence as well as a parallel, but that'll allow you to define really any type of animation that you want. You could also just implement your own effects based on the base effect classes. And to get to those, just go into the ActionScript documentation. You'll see here's the move effect, it extends tween effect, and that extends effect. And so you can see all sorts of different types of effects that you can implement here in the mx.effects package.
Okay, so it seems like combining effects with view states would make sense.
Absolutely, yeah. So in the last chapter, what we talked about was how to set up different states in your application or on your component. And so obviously a lot of effects make sense in the context of transitioning from one view state to another. And so what we call that in Flex is transitions. And so let's modify this code to first have some states in here. So first thing is, we have our button and we've positioned it correctly, but now we're going to take out the way that this move effect is being applied here, and we're going to do the movement through a state instead of instead of doing it programmatically. So we've got our button, and we'll fill in that click event handler in just a second. Actually, let's open up this tag a little bit so we have a little more room. So we've got our button, and now let's define our states. So I learned all about this in the last chapter, so we don't really need to go through this. But what we're going to do is create a new state. We'll give it a name. We'll call it button top, and then inside of this state, what we're going to do is set property. The target is going to be our button, and then the name of the property we're going to set is our Y, and then we're going to change the value to 50. Okay, so that's our state, and now let's go back to our button and set our click event handler. And now in our click event handler, we're just going to toggle those states. So current state, if it's button top, then we're going to set the current state back to the default state. Else, we're going to set the current state to button top.
Could have used a ternary expression here too.
We could have used a ternary as well. Okay, so let's just run this and make sure that this whole part is working. Our states are working correctly. So this should be very similar. We move to the top, we move to the bottom. Good. Okay, so now let's apply a transition to that state. So what we want to do is we want to say transitions. And then we're going to define, we can define more than one, but in this case we're just going to have one transition. So we just say create a transition. And then we need to tell the transition when to apply. So when you're moving from what state and to what state should this transition be applied. And so in this case we're going to say from state star, or any state, to state star. So any state change at all, we're going to apply this. We could also put in, to bottom, button top, or whatever. So that's our transition, and then inside of our transition is where we define the actual effects that we want to apply in this transition. So what we're going to say is move. So we're going to do the move effect and set the target of this move effect to our button. So all we've defined is a transition from any state to any state, apply the move effect to the button.
Now so that's any state to any state. Now if I had a more specific state to state, could I define that right after this, and that would like override the general star thing?
Yeah, so if we wanted to say only when you go from button top to some other state or to any state, so you can have multiple transitions defined that explicitly set what states to apply the transition between.
And then if it couldn't find any of those specific ones, it would drop back to the star to star thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so for instance, the first time we click that button, it's moving from the default state to the button top state. So that matches, of course, star star. And then when we click the button a second time, it's transitioning from button top back to the default state. So that
also matches star star.
Anything matches star star.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's try this one. And so there we go. We get the same transition we had before, but this time applied through states and view states and transitions. So another way to create effects is through ActionScript. So any of these effects like move can be also applied via ActionScript. It's a little out of the scope of what we wanted to cover in the book, but definitely another way to apply these effects to objects and Flex. So, and these transitions can get fairly complex if you're removing objects, adding objects, and you want to fade things in, move things around. So we have a more in-depth example in the book that goes through how you actually time the transitions when things need to happen in a certain order. So for instance, if you're removing something from the screen but you want an effect to play on that thing before it's removed, then you have to define that in your transitions. You have to define when those things happen. You can use sequences and remove child action and add child action to set those up. So there's a more in-depth example of that in the book.
So it's pretty powerful.
You can do pretty amazing things.